Hello and welcome to Stroma Insights. We're about volume 5 now, and I'm joined with two guests today. And today we're going to be talking about recently published future home standards and a little bit about future building standards. Not so much to know about that, but I'm going to cover that towards the end. I'm joined today by.
Hi, I'm Rob Waiting from Stroma.
And I'm Richard DeFleury. I'm also from Stroma.
So Rob's going to leads our domestic team, so he'll be talking about the future home stuff today, and then Richard, as I've said, will be covering what we do know about the future building standards towards the end. And I'm Stuart Oakes as usual. And so here we go. So the deadline's here. We're actually last Tuesday on the 24th, it was published. The long-awaited future homes and future building standards. And what we're going to try and do today in 15 minutes is just go through sort of the main points and the main things that will come out of that. So, Rob, it feels like we've been talking about this for 2 years because that's how long the consultation's been hanging in the air, as it were. Now we're over the finish line. What's the headlines for you?
Yep. So, as you said, on the 24th of March, we had the response from the consultation that's been out for a long time now. But what that has released is a new part of the building regulations. So the future home standards is basically the name given to the update to the building regulations. So Part L is now Part L 2026, and this has overhauled the regulations, and we've now got a 75 to 80% reduction in carbon compared to the regulations from 2013.
So that's quite significant, isn't it?
Yes. So there's quite a few changes in there, but the biggest change I would say is that gas is pretty much gone from the regulations now. There isn't a ban on gas in the regulations, but they've written it in a way that the targets set in the approved documents are so strict to achieve through the fuel factors given to gas versus electricity that you can't comply unless you're using a very efficient electric system.
So it's heat pumps, really, yeah?
Pretty much, yeah. So it'll be air source heat pump or ground source heat pump, because you need that efficient system. You need to be with a highly efficient system. You won't pass with direct electric panel heaters, for example. You need that efficient air source or ground source system. And there's the other main change that comes in. This is the big one: is that on-site renewable energy generation is expected on all dwellings now. So whilst you still need the air source heat pump to meet your emissions target, you must be generating some energy on site as well.
And in the end, that really means PV for most cases, doesn't it?
Yes. So you've got to generate your own electricity on site, PV. There may be instances where you might have a large plot where you could use a wind turbine technically, but the vast majority of cases it's going to be solar PV panels on every roof, really.
So there's some detail about that we know about amounts and quantity and things like that, isn't there?
Yes. So we'll maybe come to a bit about how much is required in a little bit, but there is a calculation that the target is set that they expect all dwellings to achieve wherever that's feasible.
Okay. And fabric? Are we talking about triple glazing, do you think?
Well, the fabric is similar to the last update. The last update, Part L 2021, was a big shift in fabric from the previous one, from Part L 2010. But this time there isn't much of a change between the fabric.
I noticed, for example, all the backstop U values are the same, and in the notional dwelling, the U values are the same, aren't they?
Yeah, mostly, yeah. So the U values are all the same as the backstops. Though if you build into the backstops, you won't comply with the fabric. You do need to be at least to the notional building values, which are much lower than the backstops. A couple of things that have changed in those notional building values are the air test. So previously the notional building used an air test of 5. It's now dropped it to 4, which is, the backstop is 8. Everybody thinks, well, if I build to 8, maybe I'd be compliant. You're going to have to be much closer to the notional building target of 4 to be compliant.
And what does that have any implications on mechanical ventilation, do you think?
Possibly, yeah. So you'd have to start thinking then, am I going to be compliant with other parts of the building regulations if I'm lowering my air test target, my air permeability target? And the other main thing we've noticed that's changed is G values on glazing. So whilst this is easy to overlook in the regulations changes, it does make quite a big difference to our calculations, because previously our SAP calculation was compared to a building using a G value that was 0.63. That was the maximum value. Whereas now it actually looks at the notional building uses whatever value we put in. So we don't have to, the simple answer is we don't have to make an improvement over that target anymore, because the target is the same as ours. So it actually makes compliance more straightforward and aligns with other Part O documents, other documents such as Part O. I don't know if Richard wants to summarise something about that.
Thanks, Rob. Certainly the G value has been something that's been a bugbear for a while, certainly since Part O came around, particularly in London, where it was necessary to drop the G value, to 0.4 or even less to pass Part O. But the SAP, you were getting absolutely hammered, and it was getting really difficult to pass the SAP because it was using a high G value and getting all the beneficial solar gains. By matching what you put in, that goes away, and now dropping the G value to comply with Part O is no longer an issue. So yes, it should make your lives a bit easier in the SAP.
And you guys doing your TM59s, that problem becomes easier to manage, probably.
Yeah, we don't get quite so much grief for dropping the G value.
There's also, on the subject of that, the SAP assessment can now account for cooling that's needed for Part O. So if your Part O TM59 assessment has said this, in order to pass Part O, because I can't open the windows, for example, I've had to put cooling in, you can now tick that box in SAP and it doesn't penalise you for introducing that cooling system.
It does differentiate between if you've added cooling by choice or whether you've added cooling for Part O, though. So if you're forced to for Part O, then you can tick a box and it doesn't penalise you in the SAP. But if you've optioned or you've chosen to put cooling in and you didn't need it, it does penalise you still.
Yeah.
But it's not that bad.
Okay, well that sounds quite positive. So moving on, the next thing is the calculation methods, the NCMs, the software. There's been a lot said about the introduction of a new methodology, the home energy model, but we're not there yet, are we, Rob?
Well, no, not quite. So there is some transitional arrangements that's been released to do with the regulations. So there's two sets of dates really on this. So the documents have been released last month in March. So we've now finally got the response to that. But it doesn't start from today. So we've got a transitional period until the 24th of March 2027 next year. We've got 1 year for anybody who's got projects coming up in the pipeline. If you register those with your building control body before March 2027, you will still be under the previous version of Part L. Future home standards won't apply to your project. So you've got a year for that. But the caveat on that is after March 2027, you've only got a year before you must start on site. So by the 24th of March 2028, those plots must have started on site. Otherwise, the whole process would reset and you would be on future home standards.
And starting, just to reiterate, it hasn't actually changed between 2021 and these current regulations, but there is a quite a strict definition about a meaningful start. It's not just foundations.
So the government have defined what that means, which basically is you've built the plot up as far as the ground floor level.
That's plot by plot. You can't do it by site.
All plots. You can't register plots to the old regulations and not build them by March 2028 to the ground floor level, basically.
Okay. It's probably worth mentioning that the future building standards, so your commercial buildings have got the same timeframes for transition.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's the regulations.
Just before you go on to that, Rob, that's for non high risk buildings, isn't it?
Yes. The dates are slightly different for if you're falling under a high risk building. So if you've got a building above 18 meters and you are going through the gateway applications with the building regulator. So those dates are basically delayed slightly to align with the changes to those regulations. So basically you've got until September 2027 to have served your Gateway 2 notice. And then you've got till September 2028 to have made the same meaningful
So
start
it's
on
moved
site.
along by 6 months, essentially, yeah.
Yeah. So,
Okay.
but that's only for high risk buildings.
Worth saying,
Yeah.
because you know, if you're building those, you have about another 6 months into your program. Okay, so that's the sort of general introduction of the regulations.
Yeah.
But let's just briefly cover the software.
Yeah. So in order to comply with these regulations, you need software to do the energy and carbon calculations. So for the last 20 years, we've used SAP as the standard assessment procedure. And the current version of that is SAP 10.2, which we use for Part L 2021 regulations. Now, for this new regulations, they've had to update the software. And the original intention was to bring out a brand new piece of software called the Home Energy Model, or HEM, which is a much more detailed calculation that uses far more inputs than SAP ever did, and looks at half-hourly energy data and far more in-depth inputs. But that isn't ready. So rather than delay the regulations completely, the government have brought out a stepping stone approach. So we've got the new version of SAP, which is called SAP 10.3, which basically is a minor update to the software to account for these new heat pump regulations and PV requirements have been tweaked into the software.
So really, so the notional building in the regulations is reflected, isn't it?
Yes. So what it means now that we've got this period where we've got the SAP 10.3 software now, it was released last week, so we can now take a calculation and run it through the Future Home Standards regulations in Part L 2026. And we've got that software will run for at least 2 years, we've been told by Elmhurst and the government. So we can continue using SAP 10.3 for at least 2 years from when HEM is released. HEM is the new software.
And that's the kind of question at the moment, that the government communication is currently at least 3 months before HEM will be available.
They've said we've got at least 3 months from now before HEM's going to land. And when that does happen, we'll have this dual running period where SAP 10.3 and HEM can be used to do your calculations for future home standards. So depending on how long that takes for HEM to come out, you could be, in the theory, using SAP 10.3 way past the initial building notice of next year and into building houses using SAP 10.3. Because what they've also confirmed is whatever version you start in, you can finish in. So if you did your design stage SAP in 10.3, you would be doing your as-built SAP and your EPC in SAP 10.3.
So our long-standing friend SAP is not dead yet?
Not quite, not yet, no.
Okay. So just some broad stuff around the software. We're still using the Braille, aren't we? We've still got photos in the Braille, the same as current regulations.
So all that geotagged photographic evidence is all still required. Nothing's new there. They haven't brought in any new photos or any new requirements on that. The one thing that's changed on the Braille is this new regulation related to PV. So it now calculates your minimum amount of PV required to comply with the new regulation.
So let's just briefly talk about the Braille report. That not photographs haven't changed, haven't they, Rob?
There's no difference to the photographs. You still have to provide the geotag photographic evidence. Same photographs, same approval process for that. But what has changed is this new section to the Braille where it refers to the minimum amount of PV required to comply with the regulation in Part L. We're calling it paragraph 5.73 of Part L, where that sets a minimum amount of PV.
Well, actually, Rob, it's minimum amount of site generated electricity, isn't it?
Yes. So it uses PV to calculate your minimum amount that you must generate on site, and how it calculates that is it's a calculation of your floor area. So you take 40% of the ground floor area of your dwelling. You then use a kilowatt peak figure of 0.22 kilowatt peak of PV and multiply that by that floor area. That will then give you a target amount of energy that you must generate on site from that array. And you can choose any renewable technology to do that, but really it's what's out there is PV or wind turbines.
Okay, well, I think that's that. We'll draw a line under that. So that essentially, we've nothing to panic about yet in terms of
Yeah.
change. And watch this space as to use the cliche.
So what we have done, is on that is we've done a few examples checks. So we've taken a couple of typical houses. We've generated some SAPs on those under the previous Part L 2021 regulations. We've copied those into SAP 10.3. Making no changes to them, just a dwelling that was previously compliant with Part L. We're looking at how they comply in the new version. And for the fabric, we're getting broadly similar results. So as long as you were compliant before, your compliance margin drops slightly due to the fact of the air tightness target being harder to achieve in the notional building. So it's going to affect you some way, but it's not a big change. You won't be doing any drastic changes in the examples we've done to see compliance achieved in typical houses. The big change is obviously the PV. You can't comply and get a BREL report with a compliant box on it unless you've added the PV to the equivalent level that you need. And we found that is quite a lot of PV required to hit this 40% rule of 0.2 kilowatt peak. So there are some big changes to come on dwellings there. If you previously weren't putting PV on, in order to meet this, you're definitely going to be putting PV on now.
But having said that, Rob, there are some exemptions, isn't there? There are some possibilities of where it's not possible.
So there is an appendix in the back of the new Part L document where it goes through some scenarios where you may not be able to achieve the PV requirement. It then sets you, okay, well, you can't meet this requirement. You do at least have to try and generate a minimum amount of PV on site. And then in the extreme cases where you might not be able to generate any PV, it then gives you, you have to go through building control and apply for an exemption, which we'll be looking for further guidance from that, I think, from the government and Elmhurst through conventions, I think, because we'll need guidance on what these exemptions mean. What is an exemption? Is it to do with design, or is it to do with site layout, or who knows yet? We'll wait for that guidance.
I think it's probably fair to say, Rob, that all things put aside, putting PV on the roof is probably a good thing because cost of energy, generating your own is going to be beneficial to the homeowner,
and especially as like the more PV that comes into the market and houses requiring it, the cost of installing it and buying it should come down as well.
Yeah, and it's the time to do it, isn't it? When you're on site, and at the end of the day, most new builds have got integral stuff, so you're offsetting the cost of the roof tiles simply, aren't you, with the PV? And actually, this sort of falls into, let's not forget, the overall strategic requirement of why we're doing this is to make future houses to be carbon neutral.
Yeah,
and indeed that's what you're finding, aren't we?
I think we are. Yes, so
finding some negative.
The fact that you now need to apply this PV target to the SAP calculations is significantly dropping the emissions and the energy consumption of the dwelling,
which is great for consumers, isn't
to a point that that for the regulated energy that's used by the dwelling, you are getting close to that zero carbon target.
That has a knock on to the EPC as well, doesn't it, Rob?
Yeah, it does. So the EPC ratings, because you are now, as long as the PV that's generated is connected to your dwelling, you're getting a huge benefit in your EPC rating. You're going to be getting very high ratings there.
So great. So this is hopefully going to work and do what in the end what we need to do, which is reduce our demand for energy generally and move that demand to renewables.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Which in the current political climate, you've got to say is a good thing. So I think that's great. I think that covers as much as we want to cover today. There's obviously a load more detail. But get in touch with us directly. We're here to help. We will be publishing a supporting document with this, on which we will publish the examples that Rob talks about in terms of the comparisons between 10.2 and 10.3, and then we will follow that up with HEM when we know we've got a working version of HEM to try it on. We're trying not to speculate on the sort of basic stuff that's out there, because our experience tells us that you do it, you get an answer, someone might rely on that answer, and then when we actually get the approved version of the software published, things don't quite work out the same. We've got to go back to the drawing board. So as Rob said, we've got a reasonable amount of time just to think about this. We've sort of known what's going to be coming anyway.
Yeah.
So let's just.
I'd say the main takeaway from this is plan to be using a heat pump.
Yeah.
Make sure your sites have got sufficient electricity capacity in them to be heat pump powered rather than gas. You won't be providing gas connections anymore to any sites.
And plan for generation on site.
Yeah, make sure the grid can be accepting the amount of PV you're going to need.
Yeah. So one thing I've made a note about was that there was talk about measured performance and what was being called a Future Homes brand in the consultation. That's not been carried forward, which I'm quite disappointed about. I think the essence of that was we do some kind of measurement of thermal performance of the actual dwellings on completion, so HTC, some actual in situ U value calculations, metering, that sort of thing, but that's not been happening. So I think it's a shame, because I think this is the kind of this is the natural, not successor, because air tightness testing is a great metric for quality of build, but another way of giving assurance that the building has been built to the correct standard. Anyway, so just quickly at the end, Richard, talk about the future building standard. After listeners, don't worry, this won't last as long as that.
It'll definitely be shorter.
So, Rich, do you want to just give us your view?
Yeah, well, as we've already mentioned, the timelines for implementation are the same as the residential, so I won't really cover that. We got a document came out at the same time. Unfortunately, it doesn't really tell us a whole lot about what changed, because it's very similar to what we had in the previous volume 2. But there are some bits and pieces we can pick up. So, for example, we know there's going to be PV in the notional building. Again, there's some exemptions as to certain building types, but we haven't got all the details on that. It's going to be harder to pass. We know that without a shadow of a doubt. But again, we don't know exactly how much harder, simply because we haven't got the details. And when I say we haven't got the details, we've got volume 2, but we have no software in terms of actual final published ones. There's a consultation one, but that's nearly 2 years old now, I think.
Yeah.
And we haven't got all the various manuals and documents. They haven't been published as of yet, so we're still waiting for the new NCM manual, which is referred to, and that'll give us the details of exactly what has gone into the notional building and the changes that have happened, so we can start to dissect that.
But in the end, I think, as you say, it's no gas. Renewables is good.
Yeah.
Make your fabric as good as it can be. It's not that. I know that's easily said.
There is something in there about which obviously they're trying to push on heat pumps and get rid of the gas. In the same way, they haven't said you can't use gas, but what they have said, and I haven't got any more details, is that you have to use a low carbon heat source. But they haven't given us all the details on that yet. So there is a line in there which is obviously alluding to pushing heat pumps, and there's no reason commercially why you can't do that now.
No. Okay. Well, I've used this before. Watch this space. As soon as we know more, we'll probably
do another podcast.
Come back on and do another podcast. So I'd say thank you very much, Rob. Thank you very much, Richard. Unless there's anything else you want to conclude with?
No, that's it for me.
Well, thank you for listening, and we will. If you've got any questions, either look on our website. We'll be publishing an accompanying document to this, as I say, with those with the examples that Rob mentioned, or give us a shout. Happy to discuss your projects, and we'll talk to you all very soon. Thank you.